Hi, and thank you for joining us for the State of Leadership, Simple and Beyond. This is the third, no, it's not. It's the fourth Thursday. It's the fourth Thursday, which means that it is book club day. That is Robert Hilliard. I am Whitnie Wiley, and we are going to be talking about the book Leading with Soul today. And Robert's got the book up. It is by Bolman and Deal. If you haven't gotten your copy and haven't read it, you absolutely must. It's a great read. And Robert is going to lead us in the discussion on the book today. So, Robert, take it away.
Yeah, you know, this was interesting, Whitney. This is my third time reading this book. The first time was when we were in grad school. We had to read the book as part of our required reading. The second time, I really enjoyed it, and the second time, I read it because I thought there was some really good ideas in it. And I wanted to experience them without the pressure of reading the book under time constraints.
Or because someone told you that you had to.
Or you had to do it. The third time I read the book, this time around, I read it for a couple of, we had the book club. I thought it would be a great addition to the books that we have on our list. But also I wanted to discover why I liked it so much. So I read it, and we'll talk a little bit about that toward the end of today's show. But I want to talk about just the book right now, and I'll ask you some questions about it. So
Okay.
really the background of this book is that it's the story of a leader. His name is Steve. And Steve has hit a wall in his career. He doesn't know, he's a high achiever. He's usually very good at what he does, but he's hit a wall in his career. He doesn't know how to move forward. And his boss recommend that he work with a spiritual guide. Now, it's really interesting because the first time I read it, I didn't catch that she's a coach whose niche is helping leaders bring spirituality to their job, but because they refer to her as a spiritual guide, but she's really a coach. And her name is Maria. And it really follows Steve's journey as he meets her. When he first sets out, he is not too happy, doesn't know why he has to travel way upstate to meet this weird person who's supposed to help him with his spirit. And so they talk about that. And those are the two main characters. And what I really liked about the book is that they tell you that it's a leadership book that teaches its lessons through story.
Yeah.
Which is unique. A lot of times we have books that we read, and you and I have read tons of leadership books. A lot of them talk a lot about theory, talk about application, but and I don't want to use the word dry, but they're dry, right?
They're dry.
There's not a story attached here. There may be some anecdotal things in there, but it's usually just, you read it and you're like, oh my gosh, when am I going to get to the stuff that I really need? Now, this book is a story and it keeps you engaged. And I really like that about it. And then the authors come in every 3 or 4 chapters to give you, they're called interludes, where they come and they explain what it is going on in the story and what you've just read. So I like it because it follows that story format and it keeps you engaged, and you get really invested in the characters. So I want to ask you the question, why do you like it so much?
I would agree with you. The fact that it's a story and that we go on this journey with Steve and have this opportunity to sort of feel what he's feeling, right? And while it may not have been in exactly the same way that he experiences, we have the same challenges, right? When we're someone comes to us and they're suggesting that we could use some help in a particular way to make some changes that need to be made, there's a feeling of being, very uncomfortable, right? I think at times he was beyond uncomfortable. He was a little bit scared. You explained it. He goes up to, she's up in the mountains somewhere, very remote, hours from wherever he is. And he has no clue why he's going there. And it's just really cool to see him go from a place where he has no clue to he has clue, and then he's now the guy, right? His journey is he becomes the guide for others, and it's really cool to watch his transformation and to think about our own transformations um, as we are taking this journey with him.
Yeah, you know, I'm glad you put it that way, because it's something that we all can relate to. Many times I know I have been put in situations where I may have been struggling or reluctant to admit that I'm struggling.
Mm-hmm.
And I have someone who's astute enough and wise enough to pull me over to the side and say, hey, look, it looks like you're struggling. Here's how I think you can benefit from working with another person. And usually when that happens, I have to tell you, and this is something that we talk about, people, we just don't like change. So
Yes.
the first thing that we do is we reject it. I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with me. They're making this up. They don't. The other part of that, we don't like it when people can see what's going on
True.
on the inside, right? Because we think that no one knows what I'm thinking. A lot of times we are really projecting what it is that's going on the inside. And so, yeah. And so I think that was, really eloquently put by you. And the second part of this, and I'm going to go through, always have some notes when I do the book things. The second part of the concepts. And I remember reading this the first time going, okay, so leading with soul, what is this about? Is she going to be, teaching him things while playing James Brown records in the background?
See, you had your own fear about it.
Exactly. Right? Like, what's going on here? But she explains, and he has those questions too. What soul? And she says, it's who you are. It's, your being. It's who you are, who you think you are. And spirit, which a lot of us use interchangeably with soul, is how you express who you are. So it's really giving him the opportunity to discover who he is and how to express who he is on the job.
And I think, what happens to a lot of us is we tend to have our identity wrapped up in the job that we have or the title that we have, right? So, and I don't know if I've shared this here before, but I've had people, particularly when I was in the world of, actively working as a lawyer, and people would say, I didn't even know you were a lawyer. It's like, because that's not who I walk around as. But there are some people who, they're a lawyer when they walk towards you, right? And then the minute they open their mouths, and everything they share with you is about that. And so that we can step away from the identity, the titles that we sort of hang our hats on, and get to a place where we're human, right? We are soul, we have spirit, we express ourselves through spirit, and that we can move forward with heart and still do the things that we believe that leaders do, or that lawyers do, or doctors do, or CEOs, or whatever it is, that they're not disconnected, right? And that we can show up with our full authentic selves, and not just this piece that we think is the piece that is what gets people to respond to us, particularly in leadership roles, right? We're going through life thinking it's the title, it's the authority that I hold because of the title that gets people to do what I want, or move the way I want. And in reality, it doesn't have to be that way. Yes, you can wield power and do it that way, but you can do it, I would say, auto-magically, right? And sort of have it work for you in a more effective way by tapping into who you are. And that starts with getting in touch with your heart, right? And it could have been titled Leading with Heart as much as Leading with Soul.
Really, you're right. And it was really about him connecting with who he is at his core, his authentic self. And what I loved about it, and I'm going to go a little out of sequence and come back to the concepts, is, Maria gets him, and a really good teacher, a really good guide, a really good coach will get you as soon as they see you. Right? And so to connect to what you're saying about Steve is he's struggling because his whole identity was wrapped up in his job. And if the job isn't going well, then who am I?
Exactly.
So well, if I don't have my job, then then I'm nothing. If I can't do this job the way I think I should, then who am I? And she asks him this a really brilliant question. She goes, do you like where you are? Because she senses his resistance, and he says, not as much as I used to. And so then her final question, which is brilliant, she goes, what changed? And it really starts him to really think about his circumstance and what led to him being where he's. And a lot of times we're not paying attention.
Correct.
And he wasn't paying attention to what was going on in his life that led him to the point of being stuck. And so I think it's right around there. And of course, we're not going to tell you the entire book because we want you to go buy the book and read it. But it's right around there. She starts talking to him about gifts that a leader can give to their team. And these are gifts that he could give to himself, gifts that he can give to those who follow him. And the first one is the gift of authorship. And you can go ahead and put these up. I think you have the graphic. Yeah, is the gift of authorship. And here it really starts at the bottom. So the gift of authorship, which is really being able to put your stamp on your work, to be able to express yourself in your work in an authentic way. The second gift, and I have to admit, I cringed a little bit when I read this the first time, was the gift of love. I was like, what? Where are we going with this? And it's really caring enough about your people to find out what matters to them. That's what love. That's a big part of it. They certainly mentioned that in the book. The third gift is power, giving people the ability to make decisions. For example, and I'll use this as an example, a salesperson who can give a discount when they meet a customer that may not be able to pay the full price. They don't have to go running back to the manager. Of course, there's probably always some parameters around that, not probably, but always some parameters around that. But they have the power to do that. They have that autonomy to make those decisions. And a lot of leaders are sometimes, I should say, reluctant to give power to the people on their team, the people that follow them. I worked in an organization like that where everything was so tightly bottled up that you had to go to the leader for everything, and the leader had to go to the CEO for everything. So there was no autonomy there. And it was a very frustrating situation for many of the workers that work there. And the last gift is the gift of significance, to know that the work that you're doing is making an impact, making a difference in the lives of others. And with that, building community in your job, in your business, so that you all can make an impact outside of the business, in the world at large, or in the system, as we say on the show. So that's really the graphic for the 4 gifts. And I think I can't be certain about this. I think Steve had the same reaction to the gift of love that I did when I first heard it. Was, oh, where's she going with this?
It's interesting that you say that, because before our graduate program and reading this book, right? So we went to grad school, got our master's degrees at St. Joseph's University, which is a Jesuit university. And the sort of super simplified version of this, the leadership philosophy of the Jesuits is rooted in love. Right. And so when by the time I got to St. Joseph's, I had actually come from an undergraduate program at a different Jesuit university. So I had that sort of as a foundational basis of what Jesuit philosophy is about leadership. And so I wasn't nearly as taken back that as you are. And I think the other thing is sort of an inherently male, female, masculine, not so much male, female, but masculine, feminine approach to leadership, is that a feminine approach to leadership would be more rooted in love, right? And empathy. And a lot of the concepts that we talk about here on the state of leadership that have not historically been thought to be part of what leadership is about, right? Leadership historically has been much more masculine in approach, more command and control. And over, time, it's evolved away from that. There, of course, are people who still lead that way or still operate that way, I will say. And this concept that love and caring and looking out for the servant leadership approach to interacting and dealing with those that you're leading is a much more mainstream, much more accepted. And so I will just say I wasn't as taken aback by it as you are.
Well, you also considering the leadership role models that I had, and I use that term role model very, very loosely because I was not emulating what they were doing, but the people that I saw, the people around, they had zero interest in showing any kind of, I'm not trying to disparage anybody, but they weren't into showing any kind of caring.
Right.
It was about leadership through authority. There was very, very little authorship, certainly no love or caring in there. Significance, they talked a lot about significance and making a difference, but that's really, I don't think they really understood what making a difference really was. It was like, we want to make our customers happy. Well, that's the goal of any business, right? You want to, but really making a difference in their lives, that's different than making them happy and satisfying. And sometimes in order to make a significant change, the customer may be initially unhappy.
True.
Because you need to sometimes educate them about things that they can do to improve their situation, and especially in things like healthcare, where I spent a lot of my time being around these leaders. And power in these organizations were mostly to be kept. Where
Yes.
They did not share power. They did not want anybody to have any kind of autonomy because they felt that if they give power, it somehow weakens them.
Right.
And so these were concepts that I was reading and looking at and going, I don't really see this in my organization at the time I was reading it. And the second part of that was, I wondered how they would react if I introduced it. Of course, I never did. Because I had a situation before that where I gave a book to my director and simply would go in there and watch it sit on his credenza for 7 months until I eventually took it back and he didn't even know I took the book back. So they were not interested in, they were like, this is what I do. This is how I did it.
Yeah.
I'm successful. I don't need you to, I don't want to learn anything else. But then they would come to you when they got stuck.
Right.
I don't know, but they didn't have the awareness that Steve had. And part of that is because Steve had a really good sponsor in the book. His name is John, and he's the one that sends him to Maria because he knows Maria very well. They worked together in a previous life.
And what's really interesting, I want to say something about the power, and then I want to tap on your comment about Steve, but the power, and this happens in the book, that you find that when you actually give power, right, under the right circumstances, in the right environment, your power is actually multiplied. it can be exponentially increased rather than decreased. And the concept of holding on to power is a lack mentality, right?
Sure.
Where it's, if I don't hold on to power, I won't have power, rather than particularly when it is with the authorship, right? Giving people a sense of ownership and autonomy, and saying that, what is it that you want to do, right? And then you can use the power. I give you the power that you need to do and own what it is that you're trying to do, right? And that takes time. Steve didn't get it right first time, right? And so it is something to certainly I think that part of his journey really reflected a lot of the experiences that I'd had in organizations that I'd been in.
Which makes the book that much even better, because you can actually see a lot of parallels. I've seen them in the various jobs that I've worked in, and you say that you have as well. The other thing that the authors do a very good job of is clarifying the difference between authorship and power, because some people get them confused. And I'm not going to do that. I would love for people to read the book and report back to us what they think. So I'm just going to dangle that carrot out there. But so they sometimes get confused, and they clarify that very well. The question I want to ask you, Whitnie, is what was your favorite part of the book?
The part that I don't know if favorite, but the part that really touched me and resonated with me, not from experiences, well, maybe partially from experiences of the past, but when there was the attempt to, I think it was a Christmas party or New Year's party or something like that, right? There was some party, and they had changed the way, had taken out a tradition that had happened, and these people had gone forth with like the most enthusiasm that they were doing the right thing and with all the right intentions, and it fell flat. Right? Because, and this is what happens a lot in organizations, that the leadership will decide to do something, again, maybe with the best of intentions, but they do it in a vacuum, right? They do it from a siloed position of sort of their ivory tower, right? And don't take into account the other things that go into it. So their attempt to do something that was really great just fell flat. And it happens, but they learned from it. And for me, the fact that you can learn from those experiences, and then the next time they did it right, the next time, for me, that was a part that really resonated with me, because I'm really about lessons, and how that journey is about lessons, right? You can't really have a journey. It's not about just going from here to there, right? It's about experiencing the trip. It's about experiencing the journey and learning things along the way, whether it is just simply through observation or it is through making mistakes and then recognizing what you need to do to correct things.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think that is among one of my favorite parts of the story. I think probably my favorite overall parts of the story are the ones when Steve is thinking back, and of course, this is a fictional character, and a lot of us don't have the awareness that this fictional character has. But he's thinking back on his first impressions of Maria and how far he's come. I always like, that fact that, we should always go back and look at our journey And he looks at his journey, and of course, this is not a real person. I wish it were, but it's not. But he's like,
Oh, it's a lot of real people.
it's true, it's true. But he's thinking, I can't believe I was this way.
Yeah.
And because now he has a completely different relationship with this spiritual guide slash coach that he now trusts and he's opened up to, and he can share his successes, he can share his challenges, he can share his failures with, and he can learn from them because he's being open, transparent, and vulnerable with this person. And her approach to him, it's with him is always, okay, well, what did you learn from that? And ask really good questions to get him to make the connections on his own.
And that was going to be the other part that I was going to say, is that I love that aspect where she's not telling him. I don't think she ever tells him once what his problems were, right? Or what was wrong with him. It was always through a question, allowing him to draw the wisdom that is already right. He has the answers. He has all the answers. He just needs to sort of get out of his own way in order to get to them, right? To tap into his heart, to tap into his soul so that he can express his spirit with his people, which he can't do initially. Because the other part is you mentioned, in his reflections, right? He's reflecting on his interactions with her. And it's not just getting to a place where he gets to know her and understand her, but he gets to know himself, right? That he thought was somebody else. And it happens to us. Things are just piled on, experiences, other people's expectations, looking out into the world, our ambitions, right? All of those things start to pile on top. And then we find ourselves one day not recognizing ourselves. And like you said, wondering, why am I stuck? Why am I feeling this way? I have everything I've ever wanted, everything I've worked for, and it's not enough, right? But it's not enough that it is, what else can I get? It becomes, it's not enough, and what do I need to shed so I can get back to the reality of who I am? And when we can do that, we can, right, show up authentically and really connect with the people that we're leading, rather than with this, I'll call it a facade, right? It's not a facade in that we're putting it on intentionally to, dupe other people, but it becomes a facade because it's not the reality of who we are. And so when we can get to our soul, we can really tap into that. And it's part of the journey that I've been on. I would say not because of the book, but because of some things that have happened in my life, primarily the death of my son. And I started asking questions, the same kinds of, it's like, what am I doing here? Right? Yeah. What is it that I want? How do I want to show up? How do I want to impact the world? Life is short, and there's nothing like death, right? That it close to you that makes you ask those questions. And when I started asking the questions and trying to figure out who I am, you mentioned this earlier when we were talking about identity. If your identity is wrapped up in your job and it's not working anymore, and you have to say, well, if I'm not this, who am I?
Yeah.
Right? When my son was no longer here, I was a mother. It's like, who am I? Right? And I have to tap into and get in touch with the identity of who I am, regardless of what's going on external to me, regardless of whether my son is here, regardless of whether I have this job, that job, any other job, right? I have to be who I am in all circumstances. And it's an eye-opening it's an eye-opening journey, and it's one that required me to tap into, I would say, my feminine side. I will own this. Someone who's very analytical, very logical, very. I think I was more connected to my masculine side than my feminine side, is for as long as I could remember. And it was, I would say, it was probably, my feminine side was probably awakened a little bit when I became a mother. But when my son passed, there was a shift, and I recognized I needed to be more heart-centered and vulnerable. And here's the thing that I think, and at the time I didn't make the connection, that just one simple act of someone in the days after my son passed, a colleague of mine called and said, "What do you need?" And I was like, I don't need anything. Right. I need my son back. So it's like the sum total of what I could think. She says, "I'm going to send," knowing that people would be coming to the house with this service and whatnot. She said, "I'm going to send a maid, housekeeper, over to your," and I'm like, "No, you don't need to do that. I don't need anything." Right. And it was days later, maybe weeks later, that I thought about that event. And I was like, you weren't even vulnerable in a time when that's all you really had.
Right.
Right?
Right.
You weren't even vulnerable in that moment. And it sent me down a path of really thinking about being vulnerable, being willing to be that, because without that, you sort of can't express. You can't express love. You can't feel love, really. And in the context of this book, if you can't get there, then you can't lead with love.
Right. Right. And I want to thank you for sharing that. 'Cause, I'm a very private person, and I know it takes a lot of guts to share very personal things. So I appreciate you sharing that. And that person gave you the gift of love, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that's the amazing thing about the book, is you can see how those things, how they apply to your life. You may not have known it at the time, but when you read the book, you're like, "Oh wow, I experienced that." So thank you again for sharing that. The other thing that I find really, really impressive about the authors of this book, knowing that people will have lots of questions, is that they answer lots of questions at the end of the book. I believe they have 18, if I counted them correctly, 18 questions from the people that have written in and shared some of the questions, and they answer those questions. And I'm just going to talk about four of them. One is, what makes this book different from other leadership books? We kind of answered that a little bit today. They have a little different take on it. It incorporates a lot of what we said. The second one is, how can you use the book to have conversations with friends and colleagues? Because they want people to share the concepts of these books, just like we're doing right now, of this book, I should say, like we're doing right now, and have a conversation about how you can apply it, how the book has it changed you, has it not changed you. Another question they ask, and this was the one that was really applicable to me, was, how can I lead with soul when I work in an organization that restricts everything
That's
I
so
do?
less.
Like, how can I do it? And they answer those questions. Those are hard questions to ask, and hard questions to answer. And they give those. And one of my favorites is, how can I use this with a difficult employee? Because it's great to think that you're gonna read a book and it's going to give you these amazing leadership concepts, and you go and you get struck by a bolt of lightning and you're going to use them and everything's going to be great. And that's not always the case. When you introduce these concepts to people in your team, there's always going to be resistance, because like we say, people always, most likely 99% of the time, will resist change, especially if you have been an absent leader. You just kind of mailing it in every day, and then all of a sudden you show up and you're like, hey, I care about you. They're like, okay, what's the catch here? Right? The saying I have is, if I walked up to somebody and gave them $1 million, they'd be like, what do you want me to do? No, it's your money. Just take it and run.
Yeah, that's not a good way to go, right?
Yeah. So that's one of the things I really liked about the book. So it's at the end of the book, they give you a tons of Q&A, and it's just really, really helpful. And now for I think the $100,000 question, if I figured out why I like the book so much. So so before we go to that, Whitnie, anything you want to add to what I said?
No, I enjoyed the conversation. I am glad that you made the recommendation for the book. I had not read it again since grad school. And it definitely reminded me and I'll say this week I was training. So I contract with a training company. I was doing some training. And, I think this was flowing through me as I was training this week. And sometimes it's challenging to train people who are sent to training rather than voluntarily.
They're voluntold.
Right. And I was blessed this week with trainees who wanted to be there, were definitely servant leaders, and we had an opportunity to talk about some of the concepts here. It was not my place to make this as a recommendation for them, but I could incorporate, because I was in the throes over the last couple of weeks of being, ensconced in reading the book. So I think it sort of was permeating through me, and it was a vibe that was definitely felt, particularly with people that I could feel this is the way they want to lead, right? The servant leadership came up as a concept, and wanting to be examples and to lead with love, basically, is what was said. So it was good timing and fortuitous timing, and I'm glad you selected it.
Thank you. Thank you. So with that, we're going to answer the big question, why I like the book so much. And if you could put up that last graphic, I'm going to talk about this. So I don't know why I didn't catch this the first two times I read it, but the book, I think they may even mention it someplace in the book, because I certainly didn't, I didn't stumble upon this on my own. I read it in the book somewhere, but they base Steve's journey on the hero's journey. And I've heard this described in as little as 3 different parts, as many as 12. You know me. Which do you think I like, Whitnie? I like the 12-step version.
I was going to say that, but I wanted you to say it yourself.
So the first part of it is you have the ordinary world, and you see the ordinary world is you see the person in their natural, for lack of a better word, habitat, and that is Steve driving up the mountain to meet his spiritual guide, and all his thoughts and why am I doing this? This is ridiculous. And then you have, after that, you have the call to adventure. So you have the call to adventure, which was Maria essentially challenging him, saying, look, there's something wrong. Something has changed. What was it? How are you gonna move forward from here? And so, you have that call to action. And then, of course, the person rejects it. They reject it. And so that's Steve, really struggling with this whole concept of soul and spirit and love. Yuck. All these things that just he wasn't feeling at the time. And then, so that's the refusal of the call. And then you get to meet the mentor. And although she's there in the beginning of the book, he really doesn't meet her until he starts having some, her in her essence. He starts asking her some questions about her life, and she starts answering those things. And then he really, truly meets her. And then he crosses the threshold, which is the fifth part of that. He crossed the threshold. And so the hero commits because the mentor has given him some insight, just enough to get their confidence going. They cross the threshold and they start on the journey. And then they have tests and trials. And that's very clearly, very clearly illustrated in the book. They have test trials. They meet allies and they meet some enemies, people that, sometimes they meet frenemies, right? So people that work against them, but all the while they're learning because they have their mentor as their guide to help them, to help them take a look at these tests and to just really parse out the lessons that are being learned as they embark on this journey. And then the part of the right around where it says that helper and challenges and temptations, there's something called, some people call it the approach to the innermost cave. And now it was clearly illustrated. If you're a fan of Star Wars, that was in The Empire Strikes Back. They literally go into a cave. So that was a template for that movie as well. And this is the part of the journey where the hero and the guide gather their supplies. They can see off into the distance, their destination. They know that's the place where their trial is really going to take place. So they may need a map. They may need somebody else to join them that knows the terrain there. They need their provisions. They're getting ready. And then they go and they get to this place, and that's when they have the trial or the ordeal. That is where they are thrust into the fire. And if the hero is successful, they gain a reward. And that reward in the book are the gifts, the 4 gifts, that we talked about: authorship, love, power, and significance. And then they have these gifts or the reward or power in many of the stories that we read. They start returning home. So they start to return home, the road back, and they are now, they say resurrected, reborn, and then they have the final battle or the final trial. They got the power through that ordeal, and now they're using it for the task for which they set out on their journey for, and then they return home, triumphant. So that's one of the reasons why the book, and this is so funny because I started thinking about this. I'm like start reading oh yeah, this is the hero's journey. I'm like, oh, okay, this is Star Wars, this is Lord of the Rings, this is the Hunger Games, it's Harry Potter, it's every, if you take this template, have some fun with it. You'll watch a movie and you can start to see how people have used this for generations and use it to create stories. And so that was the big answer to my questions. Like, duh, it's like Star Wars, but for leaders.
The leader wars.
Leader wars, yeah. Which is really funny. I had a conversation with this. This is really. I'm going to tell on myself a little bit because I mentioned the Hunger Games. I was working in an organization, and I was the OD consultant there. I was embedded in the organization. I worked there for many years, and one of the leaders asked me, I don't understand why people don't help each other here. I said, because this is the Hunger Games. I said, you don't help people here. You have to get to the top. I said, it's the culture of the organization. You could change that, but you need to understand, if you're going to change it, you start with understanding the landscape of where you are. And so I thought that was very funny. So I'm glad I was able to mention the Hunger Games twice today.
That is so true. When people ask, well, why doesn't such and such happen? Or why does such and such happen? It's your culture, right? None of that is happening in a vacuum, right? None of that is like, is random. So if you're wondering why, it's your culture. Yeah. And as Robert said, if you don't like it, you can change it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, Whitnie, thank you for letting me lead today's discussion. This was a lot of fun.
Letting you, it was my pleasure.
Well,
we're partners here in
this show, but you are the most eloquent MC of the show. So
thank you.
I appreciate you letting me, sharing the microphone with me.
And I'm going to share the microphone with you again next month, because next month our reading selection is the Harvard Business Review's Emotional Intelligence, Influence, and Persuasion by Morgan Cialdini, Hill, et cetera, et cetera.
It's got a ton of people in it, yeah.
We'll be having that discussion on Thursday, March 23rd, always the fourth Thursday of the month. We'll have our book club discussion again. It's HBR's Emotional Intelligence, Influence, and Persuasion. And that is another Robert Hilliard selection. And so we'll have that discussion. Robert, anything you want to share if anyone wants to get in touch with you and work with you?
Yeah, sure. I love working with leaders that are in that position of hitting the wall, not knowing how to move forward. If you're ever in that situation, please reach out to me. Whitnie put my website on the bottom there. You can reach out to me at inspireme@roberthilliardcoaching.com. There's actually a form there on my website. You can fill that out, send that to me, and I will answer you immediately. I usually turn that around within 24 hours, and we can set up a chemistry call, see if we're the right fit for each other, and go on from there.
And if Robert's not the right fit, he can kick you down to me.
So. Absolutely. Absolutely. And, it's always my philosophy that when I work with someone, even in a chemistry/discovery session, that you walk away with something that you could use. So hopefully if you do that, even if it's one session, I hope to give you something that you could use right away.
Absolutely. And Robert is a brilliant guide and executive coach. So reach out if you are in need. And if there's anything that we can do for you on an organizational level, please feel free to reach out as well. Again, next month, we are reading Emotional Intelligence, Influence, and Persuasion, fourth Thursday. But you can find us here every Thursday, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific, talking all things leadership. And our next meeting, we will be, the month of March will be about mastery. So we'll be talking about mastery and what that means and how you can achieve that. So until next time, take care.
Bye now.